So not a lot of people can say they have been in Donald Trump's inner circle from beginning to arraignment, but this guy has. His name is Boris Epshteyn. He worked on Trump's presidential campaign in 2016 and then later in the Trump White House. He is now a legal advisor to Trump, and his job is to kind of oversee both the civil and criminal lawyers defending Trump in his various investigations. Epshteyn has said that his closeness to Trump is a matter of loyalty, but that loyalty has also resulted in Epshteyn getting tangled up in his boss's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. He was at the Ellipse rally when Trump urged supporters to march to the Capitol. He stood alongside Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and others as they made their outlandish claims about supposed fraud in the aftermath of the election. And he also became a TV surrogate for Trump, telling the American public that the integrity of the election rested with the executive. Watch this.
The president of the United States is the one who makes this decision. And as the chief executive, it's incumbent upon the president to ensure that this election was done in a fair and square manner.
Now, of course, the chief executive has nothing to do with elections. State and local officials in this country are the ones that actually run elections. Governors sign the elector certificates. Congress certifies the electoral votes. But it makes sense that he said that because not long after that remark, we actually learned that Mr. Epshteyn was involved in the fake elector plot to assign electoral votes to Trump in 7 states he had actually lost.
There's also been reporting about the attempt to seat fraudulent electors. Is that something you ever worked on or would support, for example, in Michigan?
Yes, I was part of the process to make sure there were alternate electors for when, as we hoped, the challenges to the seated electors would be heard and would be successful. Everything that was done illegally by the Trump legal team, according to the rules and under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani.
All under the leadership of Rudy Giuliani. A lot of people watched that interview, including prosecutors in Georgia, who quickly subpoenaed Epshteyn over his direct involvement with this fake elector plot. And 2 weeks later, the FBI seized his phone. And all of this context is actually important because yesterday, federal prosecutors in the special counsel's office, they interviewed Epshteyn for multiple hours. ABC News reported that, quote, the interview was largely focused on the efforts by Trump and his allies to overturn Trump's 2020 election loss. Now, what's even more revealing about this interview, ABC reports, is that special counsel Jack Smith actually sat himself in on a portion of the interview. That's not common, and it's sort of a big deal. You know what else is also a big deal? Today, Boris Epshteyn reportedly went back in for a second day of questioning. Considering that the FBI has Epshteyn's phone, 2 days might just be the time prosecutors need to discuss what they found. Another possibility is that day 2 of questioning is focused on the Mar-a-Lago investigation, in which Epshteyn also played a key role. Joining us now is former federal prosecutor and legal analyst Shanlon Wu. Shan, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Greatly appreciate your time. Let's talk about that second revelation. I mean, the fact that he was there for 2 days. Why do you think prosecutors needed 2 days to interview Mr. Epshteyn? And how significant is the fact, as ABC News was reporting, that the special counsel himself, Jack Smith, sat in on a portion of that interview?
Well, I think it really highlights how important of a witness someone like Epshteyn could be, because he's right at Trump's side. And as he boldly asserted, he's fully aware of the efforts with regard to the fraudulent electors and sort of implicating Rudy Giuliani in that as well. I think one thing to remember about it is it's such an unusual situation for a lawyer, a legal advisor, to have his phone seized. And the amount of time, as you were saying, it could take just to go through the evidence in the phone in and of itself could take a long time. He doesn't seem like a man who's averse to talking. He may feel he can sort of talk his way around issues. He obviously could be asserting at times attorney-client privilege, but when you're in there that long, it certainly doesn't sound like he's making a blanket assertion.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the phone for a moment. The fact that the FBI has Epshteyn's phone is pretty significant, I would say, given the fact that he you know, in some capacity was a lawyer in the Trump world. How does that change things for him that they have his phone and perhaps were able to access it, obviously recover it, maybe juxtapose what they're able to see on the phone with what they're questioning him about?
Yeah, it really gives them a outline to go through timelines with him, to go through the narrative, to go through what testimony he should be able to give based on what's in his phone. I can't emphasize what an odd situation it is that they have a lawyer's phone and are questioning him about the very client that he purports to represent. Most attorneys in that situation would simply immediately recuse or withdraw from representing the client because they just are in a hopelessly conflicted situation. That obviously never seems to happen with the Trump attorneys. So they just sort of like stagger on this way, doing some combination of blustering that there's attorney-client privilege and yet also trying to talk their way through things. But having something like a phone like that, that's a gold mine for prosecutors in terms of knowing where to pursue the questions.
When you think of the long list of people who've worked in, the Trump orbit, both as lawyers or perhaps in a political capacity, have ended up being in legal jeopardy, do you think somebody like a Boris Epshteyn could be in legal jeopardy?
He could be. It seems like from his actions and from what we're seeing that perhaps he's not as much in the crosshairs. Folks like Giuliani, whose name keeps popping up, or even Powell, Eastman, those seem like they're more in the crosshairs for jeopardy. I think even though Epshteyn is not a criminal defense lawyer himself, I suspect he's savvy enough that he would want to stay out of the testimony if he was really being told that he was a target or faced jeopardy.
And it seems that, Epshteyn could have said no to talking to prosecutors. Why do you think he went in? Why do you think he did not try to fight this, perhaps prolong his participation, as we've seen other Trump surrogates do?
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of people who are overly confident about themselves, rather arrogant, you'll see this sometimes with high-powered executives and such, they really think that they're able to talk their way out of anything. And so that might be why he feels, he's good enough to get in there and talk without having to fight it legally, without having to assert a privilege, and perhaps feels that he can do his client a lot of good. No doubt he may feel that it inures him to Trump, being unafraid to go in there and put on the spin machine for Trump. But there's a reason why press relations people usually aren't involved in the substance of policymaking decisions or legal strategy decisions, because they're really involved in doing spin. They're not involved in that substantive effort. Somebody like him seems to want to do both, and usually that's a really bad idea.
Let me ask you, if I can, Shan, about another development that we saw this evening. It's also a Trump matter. There is this ongoing legal struggle here in Manhattan. We learned tonight that the Manhattan DA's office withdrew its appeal of a federal judge's decision that former prosecutor Mark Pomerantz must testify to the House Judiciary Committee, basically paving the way for him to cooperate with the House Judiciary Committee in that inquiry, as I understand it, with the presence of a lawyer from the Manhattan DA's office. What do you make of that? Is that significant, and what do you anticipate happens next?
I think for the Manhattan DA's office, it was a critical win for them to be able to have their own general counsel there for this testimony, because they really want to protect the privilege and confidential discussions that have gone on there, which legally really aren't Pomerantz's to waive. And so they're really wanting to protect that. I think some of the calculus may have been that trying to wholesale seal him off, block him at all from appearing, was probably not a very sound legal argument to be able to make, especially given he'd written a book. But question by question, that's usually where privilege really gets litigated and asserted, is very specific to the topic and the question. So this actually makes a lot of sense for them to do it this way, and I think it gives them a lot of protection for their work product as well.
That is scheduled to take place May 12th. We'll see whether or not that does take place on time. Former federal prosecutor and legal analyst Shanlon Wu, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate your time this evening.
Good to see you.